Thank you, Edgar. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for showing up here. I know it's the last day. So today we're going to talk about how you can take your hybrid architecture and make it a tactical advantage for your missions. All right, so a little bit about me and Leidos. So we're a large SI where we have about 40,000 plus employees across the world, and we mainly focus in civil, defense, intel, and health areas. And then I've been with Leidos now for about 15 years. I've always been focusing on development and the cloud development and the migration part of it. And so I personally have a lot of experience, and my team have a lot of experience with working with various customer sets, moving them to the cloud, figuring out what their mission is, how we can adapt the cloud to their mission, and to improve what they're receiving on the mission end. All right, so in this session, we're going to go over three primary areas. Right, we're going to go over, what do we mean when we say a tactical hybrid IT architecture? Right, how do we develop one? How do you sort of implement it, and how do you exploit it and use it for your specific missions, for your customers, for your clients, and for your organization? And then we're going to go over how, what we found to be an effective way to sort of evolve and iterate to a final destination, right? Keep in mind that getting to a hybrid architecture is a long process, right? It's not a one and done. It isn't done in 6 months, right? It's typically multi-year process that as you move along your journey, that your capabilities and abilities are evolving along the way. You're using your lessons learned and incorporating that back into your architecture and constantly evolving it, right? It's not a set it and forget it. And then three, we're going to look at what's worked so far in terms of zero trust and predictive intelligence. That's where the future is going. That's where the technology is going, especially with AWS. You can leverage a lot of the data that you're already gathering, right? We see mountains of data coming in, and so how do you integrate and think about zero trust principles? How do you think about how you're going to leverage that data set to provide you predictive intelligence so you can take action during your missions or during operations? All right, so just to set some context, when we're talking about hybrid IT, what we're talking about is you have an on-premise data center, one or more, right? And then you also use an AWS or an Azure, right? Our customers typically will not move everything to the cloud, right? That could be the end state years from now, but realistically, they're going to have a few data centers out there that they're going to use that for one reason or other, you're going to have to keep it on site. You may have, for example, specific data hardware that is classified or some version that you cannot move to the cloud no matter what, right? There's just policies and compliance that you have to keep it on site. What we're starting to see also is some of our customers who are in this model are looking at multi-hybrid cloud, right? So they have their data centers on site. They had started with AWS, that's their primary cloud provider, but they'll also look at Azure or they'll look at GCP for very specific workloads, right? Like the one thing that we get a lot is, customers will come to us and say, hey, I want a multi-cloud. I want to be able to move workloads between clouds. And in practice, that really doesn't make any sense because the idea of moving a workload that's already on AWS means you have to basically refactor it to work on Azure, right? The example I give folks is if you have it running on a Windows PC, an application, if you got to move it to a Mac, that's what you're doing, right? They're similar, but they're also different. So what we look at is, use AWS, for example, as your primary, right? Because volume is what gets you your discount. So keep that in mind, like volume of a specific provider is what gives you that discount. And use the other ones when you need to, right? Think about it like if I'm a rewards member with Hyatt. I'm going to stay at Hyatt as much as I can because I get the maximum rewards. But if they're not around, I'll stay at a Marriott, right? I'll stay at a Best Western. Like whatever's around, I'll take it when it's available, but I'm going to prefer a Hyatt, right? Think of it that way. And so some of you who've been in the trenches, you'll know that if you take a step back and you're talking to your customers and they're going over their architecture and you're trying to get a sense of where they are today and where they want to go, you'll commonly see what you see up here is if they have a cloud deployment, it's all jumbled, right? Same as on-premise. It's basically, we refer to it as a puzzle. And because it's a puzzle, you have to figure out, how do we put these puzzles together? What needs to run on-prem and what we should move to the cloud? And is there some kind of differentiated operating procedure that we should adopt, right? There's a lot of silos, right, that just form because in our governance space, that's just the way it is. So you have to realize that because of those silos cause a lot of issues in terms of separating capabilities, right? That results in duplication of capabilities or major overlaps of capabilities that two organizations may use and not be aware that they basically built the same thing, right? It's a little different, but they built the same thing. There's also lots of human-in-the-loop decisions right? So that's really around the people and the process. And because of the people, that requires a lot of approvals, the volume of data coming in, the number of users coming in are increasing. That just slows everything down because there's just not enough people to go around, right? So when you're going to a hybrid IT architecture, keep in mind that the technology moves a lot faster than the process and the people, right? So you can't always push with technology because when it comes to implementation time, what's really going to get you and gets us almost every single time is the process and the people. And our customers' assumption that it'll go smoothly because they work for me, I can just tell them to do something, not realizing their hands could be tied or they have specific processes they have to follow. It's not in their own control, right? There's other organizations that have to follow the same process, and that standardization needs to be maintained. All right, and then so the real trick with hybrid IT is you have an existing experience with on-prem. And when you go to the cloud and you have now both environments, both on-prem and on the cloud, your customers and their users, the warfighters at the end, don't care. They want the same experience, right, across whatever their app is running on. They actually don't mind if it's running on-prem or in the cloud, because when you're in theater and deployed, if your application is working and it's phenomenal and it's run by a hamster in a wheel, that's fine to them, right? They just need to get their job done. So that becomes a challenge because what they usually typically have on-prem may not translate into the cloud, right? And what that then causes is a ripple effect where there's a differentiation between this is how we do stuff on-prem, but when we go to the cloud, it's almost completely different. There's brand new tooling that may not work with outdated end-of-life software or processes or devices that are on-prem. And so those are the key areas you need to focus on first, because when you're migrating, what we'll hear a lot is, hey, let's do the simple stuff first. The answer really is no, don't do the simple stuff first because it's simple, you can do it. The answer should be, what are the hard things that if we can't figure out, we're gonna have to stop, right? If you can't figure that out in the beginning, then you at least haven't put out all your cash outlay and your investment and time and money and the experience of people to build something halfway there. When you realize the hardest problem, you're halfway there, you're stuck, right? So just figure out what the hardest part is first and make sure you have some kind of mitigation or some kind of approach that you could test to make sure that your solution or your idea or your theories on how it could work will work. All right, so what do we talk about when we talk about IT architecture, right? So tactical means you have a hybrid architecture back in the US somewhere or abroad. And what you're doing is you're able to exploit either within the region or at the edge, right? So some of you who went to the talk yesterday for Edge to Cloud, they focus more on how do we exploit data and assets at the edge. With tactical hybrid IT, it doesn't have to be. Not all our customers have an edge exploitation case, but many do have a layer 2, what we refer to as layer 2, a regional exploitation. So the taking advantage of all the data that's coming in, of the extra sensors, of the extra data you can now collect in the field, and combine that with the data you're collecting and the network traffic that you're seeing both on-prem and in the cloud. You can combine that data with the predictive intelligence that we'll talk about in a little bit, about how you can exploit that data and provide information and augmentation to your staff and to your warfighters. All right, so the reality is there are a few challenges, right? Again, the silos is what's really driving a lot of this. They're just natural silos and stovepipes that form that separate data, warfighters, and the mission. A lot of it is just out of natural organic growth, but a lot of it is put in place on purpose for things like need to know. So you have to sort of realize some stovepipes need to be maintained, especially for need to know data, but some stovepipes that may have just organically formed over the years due to change in group size, restructuring of the enterprise and the organization, those you can probably get around and have a dedicated way to solve that problem. But that also leads to what we said earlier, technologies, tooling, and data inconsistencies, and a lot of manual processes that are just littered throughout the organization and how they operate, right? So again, focus on those areas because those are soft areas that are high risk that will easily derail any adoption of hybrid IT. Whereas the technology part, typically, we having good engineers and smart people can figure something out, right? It's really the process of people that's really hard to sort of get around. And then so how do you overcome this, right? So the overall vision and the strategy should be, how do I design a secure hybrid architecture that can overlay and support all the existing data, all the missions, the software, the AML-powered analytics that you want now and into the future, so that as you evolve over the years, you don't have to come back and completely re-architect your architecture again. Right, so in this journey, we've done a multitude of migrations and adoptions to hybrid IT for our customers. Many are within the classified domain, so we can't unfortunately go through the very details of how we did certain things, but all of them starts to have common scenarios, common problems that we can pull out and share with you guys, and make sure, like, when you're on your journey, you don't encounter these problems and then not have a solution, be surprised, right? So the three most common is you're going to hybrid architecture because they need to reduce the number of data centers, right? So consolidation, saving money. And then the primary driver typically is, how do I extend my existing capabilities in the cloud? How do I migrate current applications into the cloud? And then typically any greenfield or new capabilities are built directly into the cloud as native applications, right? And then some customers have scenarios where they have to operate in challenging environments. And that could be you're overseas, you're in theater, you're in the middle of the desert, you don't have connectivity. It also could be, hey, you're in a rural area of the United States and cell tower coverage is spotty, you're in the swamp, you got nothing, or you're at the border and there's not much connectivity there, and you're certain areas you're just completely dead and you have no connectivity, right? So in the commercial area, they typically don't take that into consideration. They assume that data in the network and Wi-Fi is going to be around and reliable. In our industry, that isn't always the case, right? So make sure that you take that into consideration, that is there scenarios where that could happen, because that has to be a main factor in your development of your hybrid architecture. So how do we lead our customers and iterate to get to a hybrid architecture, and how can we get there and then exploit it in a way that is advantageous to our mission? So number one, I always call out the migration strategy and the roadmap. That's an area our customer has typically almost consistently has underestimated. They like to say, hey, let's just get started. I don't want to do all this planning, right? If we get started, we can get more done. That's typically not the case when we do our retrospectives, is that, hey, we should have actually spent more time looking at where we want to go, because that actually drives the risks that we should look at, how we should do the migrations, and the priority and how we're going to do that, right? So make sure that your customers, and if you're an enterprise and you're going that way, look what I refer to, what Amazon also calls working backwards, right? Look at your users, look at your warfighters. In fact, if you can get them in the room and talk to them and see how they operate and use the system, that will give you a lot of key insights on areas that need to be working properly if you're going to go to a hybrid architecture, and where areas that are going to be very difficult, right? The users are going to tell you, this is my scenario. It'll give you a very good real world experience on what they face when they need to do their mission, and you need that insight to make sure that your plan isn't going to impact their mission, right? You have to keep everything working. You can't say, hey, I'm going to shut down for like a week while I do this. And when it comes up, it may or may not meet your needs, right? That's not an okay answer. And then you have to look at the potential to increase your attack surface. Now, if done right, the attack surface actually decreases, right? We'll talk about that in the zero trust section a little bit, but there are a lot of gotchas and a lot of gaps that you could, if you're not careful, expose the existing system to more attack surfaces unintentionally, right? And then that leads to a lot of non-standard operational procedures that contributes to an increased attack surface. So you got to look at both the old and new process and how you're going to get everyone onto a single standardized process, because that standardization is really one of the keys to help you maintain and reduce your attack surface. Right, so how do we get there? So, a lot of our programs, a lot of our customers, typically their legacy applications were built in a monolithic, right? They're monoliths. The best way we've seen to get them over there is to actually take this monolith, break it up into microservices, but more importantly, these microservices need to operate in a standalone fashion, and to accomplish that, it's really to develop an API first, right? Look at how others will use you, what the inputs are and what your outputs are. Make sure that other components can use your API, because what we found is the more mature the API set, the more readily the developers will use your API and integrate your solutions, right? So because at the end of the day, the folks that are hands-on keyboard are the ones that are going to do the migration and integration and the build out of your hybrid IT architecture. And they're going to do it if you have a very well documented and consolidated API set for each microservice so that folks can basically use your microservices like building blocks and build out the solution they need, right? Because if you don't take this approach, I know the approach is fairly challenging because it's a different mindset and a different sort of culture to get there, but it's definitely worth the effort because once we've got there, we've realized that a lot of the extra risks that we identified before are more easily resolved because everything is so modularized and built as little components, and it's easy to use, right? The real trick is it has to be easy to use, and that translates into very well and matured API sets for your developers. All right, so how do you get there? How do you get from monolith to a nice microservices architecture with a great API set? First, you need to look at your applications, right? So the easy way is, getting started is hard. Folks don't really want to spend the time to figure out, how should I categorize, how should I prioritize? But our recommendation is, and what we've learned over the years is, don't underestimate the time. Spend more time than you think because it's going to pay dividends in the end. And the first thing we always have our customers do is we work through them together and we look at all their applications and we categorize essentially into two areas. We split them into the front-end applications and the back-end applications, right? Because both those application types typically have similar types of performance requirements, and you can group them together and potentially resolve similar issues among a handful of back office applications and front-end applications so that people are, again, on a standard sort of design pattern that they can deploy across multiple services. That has dividends in the teams that are sharing the same patterns can now help each other. If they run into issues or troubleshooting, that community is actually building because more people are using the same standard architecture and patterns, they can help each other troubleshoot, right? Rather than doing their own offshoot, one-off solutions that nobody has any idea what they're doing. And then the same with categorization of workload types, right? Typically, there's only two areas that we focus on, either transactional or analytics, right? And you need to know the difference because in the analytics side, that's where you can look to how do I apply predictive intelligence, how do I apply AIOps, and Zero Trust, of course, goes through both, but splitting them two gives everyone a good starting place to how to categorize and split two main areas that typically are not too closely associated, right? There's very specific missions that are analytics and very specific missions that are transactional. All right, so these are the main steps that we always go through with every customer that's worked across customer sets, across different agencies, and it's really, look at the low dependency one. It's not necessarily simple, right? That's sort of the trick. An application that could look very complicated but has one dependency, those are the type of applications you want, right? It could be simple and low dependency, but low dependency is the key. We've been in situations more of these situations that I would like to remember where, there's 20, 12, 15 interconnects with external systems. External systems mean external teams, which may mean external organizations, which means external processes, different standards, right? All that will reflect back because you're trying to move an architecture to work in a hybrid environment where those dependencies may not be there, right? They're like, I only work on-prem. I don't care that you're in the cloud. If you're in the cloud, you can't come talk to me anymore, and I'm not going to accommodate you because I don't have the people, time, or money to do so. And then work backwards again, right? So look at each application individually and look at how the users are using it. What is the scenarios? What are their day-to-day operations? Because a lot of the time there are other secondary processes and methods that they have to do every day that if you move them into this architecture, they will not be able to do anymore, right? Example is SFTP. We usually cut that off because everything has to go through 443, and SFTP, the service, is typically disabled, right? So if they're using, hey, every day I send my report over this SFTP port to this other organization in another division, and all they have is an SFTP, and I have to do this manually, and I just do it right, before I go home every day. That's not going to come out when you're looking at the architecture with them. They're only going to look at their technology stack, right? But the important part is, well, I need to know that you do that function every day because then I can tell you, okay, well, actually SFTP is not going to be around anymore. So we need to figure out a different way. Can we use an S3 bucket? Can we use, can we build a Lambda function, right? So we can build something for them to accommodate that action and that procedure, but they need to tell you that they're using SFTP, right? And then this is a great time when you're doing these migrations into a hybrid architecture to look at where you can update the architecture to accommodate security in depth, to incorporate zero trust principles. Because a lot of times, every one of these deployments are bespoke, unfortunately, right? They may follow the same compliance, but the compliance officers and the security teams on these programs have nuances that they look for as maybe a little bit difference in how they want to see the security of their applications. And so what that results in is there's maybe a common platform, but everyone seems a little bit different enough that it's more bespoke than, hey, we can just move all these applications the same way. Because if there are different security teams, then most likely you're not going to be compliant going that route. And then the fourth one we always like to point out is in a hybrid architecture, a lot of our folks like to think of, hey, we can keep all the data on site maybe, right? I don't have to pay for all that storage on AWS because it can get expensive, because when I'm growing at terabytes a month and petabytes a year, that can get pretty exorbitant, right? But the reality is our customers in the federal space typically don't have massive amounts of bandwidth from their on-prem into the cloud. And so when you try to go to a split hosting design, even though it may look good on paper, performance-wise, it's just not going to be able to handle either the near real time or just the standard expectations of your users. It's going to be a lot slower, and they're going to complain, right? Again, the users don't care. They want the same experience or better, right? So again, look at it from their point of view. Can you try it, right? A lot of customers are like, well, could you try? So if you're going to try it, of course, try it. But that is a good way to sort of pilot and reduce your risk, because now you can do a very simple example and show them, in this very simple scenario, I still can't meet the performance requirements. Therefore, in your complicated mission environment, there's no way we're going to meet this, right? So we need to move everything either to the cloud, or hey, maybe there's a way that we can just run it all on-prem if you have specific security requirements that require it. And then third and lastly, how do we integrate zero trust, and how do you build up your predictive analysis and predictive intelligence? And so with zero trust, zero trust isn't a thing. You can't buy zero trust, right? It's a sort of principles and concepts. And what we've learned is, we're trying to tell our customers zero trust solutions are bespoke. Unfortunately, they're bespoke, right? Your organization has requirements that are specific to them. They operate in a very certain way. Your users are expecting certain things to be there, and they don't want to change their workflow. That's really important, right? Users don't want to change their workflow. And so if you put in zero trust and now the user has to log in every 12 hours, that's not going to fly, right? That's going to actually impact the mission now, because what you don't realize is when you have users, for example, having to constantly log in, they're used to, hey, I'm going to power on and do my work and shut my computer down. They're used to, I can come back, I got to do something at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to come back at 4:55, open my computer, turn it on, and do it. But if you have to log in, that adds extra time. And in some scenarios, that extra time actually impacts the mission timeline, right? So it could show itself in areas that you wouldn't expect. And so when you're doing zero trust, there's 7 pillars here. This is taken from DISA. DISA had published this. And what we do is we look at the 7 pillars. We look at the areas that zero trust is supposed to cover. And we, with your application owner, go through the pillars and pick the areas that are most important. Because what you're looking at with zero trust specifically is you're trying to figure out, there's an attack surface and there's a term called protective surface, right? And that protective surface is actually much smaller than the actual attack surface, right? And what goes under a protective surface, what they refer to as protective surface, are key elements of the application and of the infrastructure that you must keep secure, right? Like the database, like mission data, or certain areas in the configuration that you have to keep safe, and those are the areas you should focus on first. So a lot of times we'll look at authentication and authorization first, of course, but really after that, talk to your customer. Where is the most sensitive areas that they have to protect no matter what, right? Is it the data? Is it the data in the device, or is it maybe the data in just the application, right? And then how are you going to have visibility and build in visibility and automation into that so that you can provide the visibility and the actions needed, but also build it in a way where it's generalized enough that you can take advantage of future solutions, of future advancements and technologies, right? Don't lock yourself into a structure that's very rigid, something that should be easily changed. That's why we also say the Microservices API architecture is great, because you can just replace the microservice with a new one and limit the blast radius and the impact and the ripple effect to all the other components that are connected together. So when you're out there, just realize Zero Trust is a journey. It's a multi-year journey. It's not a short journey. It's over time, right? So you do a little bit first. Maybe you just do the authentication, authorization first, figure out how you're going to analyze and watch and monitor that data. And then after a while, how can I improve it again? How do I go after the device? How do I do it to my network, right? What are the network controls I need to put in now that I've had some experience with a little bit of Zero Trust, right? Don't take a big bite, take a little bite, right? A lot of little bites gets you faster than big bites every single time. And then with predictive intelligence, this is a new area for our customer. It's really still sort of developing, but we have learned that with AIOps, similar to Zero Trust, it is more of a bespoke solution because in this case, you're actually using data that you're collecting from the mission and then your insights about their mission specifically and how you integrate the two. How do you look for patterns? What are the patterns that you need to look for that will actually result in actual actions that the operators can take, right? So the whole idea behind AIOps is, hey, I'm not going to replace and automate all the humans, right? I need the humans. The idea is I'm going to use AIOps and augment them, right? Basically, you want every person that's in a security operations center, that's doing ops, that's in the field, you want them to feel like with AIOps, they basically have a supercomputer on their back. That's their buddy, right? They're going to tell you, look at this intrusion, look at this threat, that's the important one. All the other ones I took care of, they're not important, you don't need to worry about it. And so what you're trying to do is increase the capabilities of the people on the ground, and you're also trying to make sure that, can I predict when a fault may occur and take early action so that your system is up longer and not down all the time for maintenance or unexpected outages, which is the worst. And then some of the best practices here is, again, a lot of our customers, and especially the engineers on both sides, they like to focus on the technology stack, right? What kind of cool technology can I use? What kind of cool tools are out there right now that are the modern trends, and that's what everyone's using? That's not actually that important. What's more important is that you're actually applying and figuring out what is the type of data and information I need that I can use while I'm in the mission. Because at the end of the day, that's what's most worthwhile to your customer. They may like to talk about technology. I love talking about technology and what we couldn't use and all the different ways we could do it. But if it doesn't result in significantly better outcomes for your customer, it won't really matter that much, right? So at the end of the day, get your customers to talk about what types of missions, what are the challenges they're facing when they're actually performing their missions, and work from there, because that way you're almost guaranteed to identify and get some really good insights on what you could do first to get some early wins, and the customer can also see, hey, you guys are really good at this, right? You did a little, and I got a lot back in return. And then one of the most difficult part, I think, with our experience here is, when you're developing implementations, look at the data. I know there's a mountain of data. It's a lot of data, right? And so it's really key. Now, how do I develop a solution that incorporates this mountain of data that just continually grows at a faster and faster rate? And again, that goes back to number one. If you know the mission and you know the business, it gives you a really good idea on what you can ignore for now and what types of new information will actually contribute to the value you're delivering when you go to a hybrid architecture. And then we've also seen that the analytics functions are typically still maturing with our customers. It's not at a very advanced state where they can just trust everything it's coming out of. So one of the key tenets is we always focus on how do you gradually evolve the analytics functions within your organization and with your customers. What areas, and functions and groups would benefit the most, right? One of the best areas is within the SOC, right? The Security Operations Center. That can provide a lot of return on investment for them if you focus there. Those folks, if you talk to them, they will have a long list of areas that make it struggle and make it hard for them. One of them being is, it's really hard to process all this threat intelligence coming in. I don't know what's important, and when it is important, I don't know where to start to figure it out, how to stop it or where to investigate, right? So those types of information you can only really gather through deep conversations with your customer and with the mission owners who are executing on the mission. And then also look at a data management platform. It could be anything from like Splunk. It could be cobbled together from open source solutions with Kafka, Grafana, for example. But whatever it is, whatever your customer is most comfortable with, or whatever tooling they want to sort of explore, have a data management platform. Without the platform, you can't scale efficiently, right? Because the data coming in is just fire hose, right? And every day there's a new fire hose coming in. So that amount of data, it only grows. But the key is, what data do I look at and what data do I ignore? And you can't really do that if you don't have a solid data management platform in place that you can use and the rest of the organization has agreed to, okay, this is the platform we're all going to use so that we can all mature together, right? You can't, don't allow them to have separate data management platforms. You know, this group likes this one, group B over here likes a different one, because then you're not able to consolidate that data, right? If they're on a same one, it's much easier to pull information that you never had access to before, because that new information can now provide new insights and new analytics that in the past you could never have seen because you've never even collected it, right? And that's it. Any questions or comments? All right. Thank you. And I think they want you to fill out this survey. All right, thanks.